Brothers and sisters, let me ask you something that may shake your heart. What would you do if you were buried alive with your dead wife in your arms? What would you do if the last face you saw before frozen earth covered your body was the lifeless face of the woman you had loved for 3 decades? And what would you do if, in that grave, when death had already claimed victory, you felt a voice in your heart whisper, "Do not give up. Speak life." This is not a story. This is not imagination. This is not a lesson copied from a book. This happened to me. My name is Abdullah bin Yusuf. I am 62 years old today, but what I am about to share happened 10 years ago on a night of extreme cold and extreme trial in a remote rural area of Northern America. A night when I learned, not through books or sermons, but through blood, fear, and miracles, that life and death belong only to Allah. At that time, I was 52 years old. I was an ordinary Muslim man serving a small Muslim community as an imam. I was not famous. I had no wealth. My only strength was my faith and my trust in Allah. We had moved to that isolated area 3 years earlier because the local Muslim families needed a place of prayer. There was no mosque, no Islamic center, only faith struggling to survive in silence and snow. We lived on a small farmhouse surrounded by open land and long distances. My wife, Aisha, was 49 years old then. She was not just my wife, she was my support, my calm, my dua. She was the kind of woman whose prayers made you feel safe, the kind of woman who reminded you of Allah without speaking much. We had 3 children. Our eldest son, Yusuf, was away studying Islamic sciences. Our daughter, Maryam, 17 years old, strong and fearless in her faith. And our youngest, Ahmed, only 10 years old, a child with severe asthma. His inhaler never left his mother's bag. His condition made winter especially dangerous for him. That winter was unlike anything we had seen before. The storm warnings had been announced for days. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Winds screamed like something alive, phone lines were down. Roads disappeared under snow, we were completely cut off from the world. That night, after Maghrib, our family gathered in the living room, as we always did. We recited Quran, we made dua. We reminded ourselves that no matter how strong the storm outside was, Allah was stronger. I remember reading verses about patience and trust, never knowing how soon those words would be tested. What we did not know was this. 3 men were already on their way. Men who had prayed behind me in the mosque, men who had shaken my hand, men who knew about the mosque donations we had collected, money meant to build a house of worship for Allah. That money was not ours, it was an amana. And because of that amana, our lives were about to be dragged into the darkest test we had ever known. The wind howled louder, snow slammed against the walls. And then, without warning, the front door exploded inward. Cold air, snow, darkness, and masked men with weapons entered our home. In that moment, I did not know that this night would end in a grave. I did not know that my wife would die in my arms. And I did not know that Allah was about to show us a power that no storm, no weapon, and no grave could overcome. That was the beginning, and the real test of faith had just started. The moment those men entered our home, I felt something break inside me. Not fear at first, but disbelief. These were not strangers. These were men who had prayed beside us, men who had raised their hands in dua, men who had eaten from our table and listened when I spoke about honesty, patience, and accountability before Allah. Now they stood in front of us wearing masks, holding weapons, bringing the storm inside our home. One of them carried a shotgun. Another held a pistol. The third had a heavy iron rod in his hand. They moved with calm confidence, not like desperate thieves, but like people who had planned every step. Snow swirled behind them as the door slammed shut. The warmth of our house disappeared instantly. "Don't scream," the man with the shotgun said. His voice was cold, controlled. "Do exactly what we say, and no one gets hurt." My daughter Maryam pulled Ahmed behind the couch. I could hear his breathing already becoming sharp and uneven. Cold air was entering the room. His asthma was reacting fast. My wife Aisha stood up without hesitation and placed herself between the men and our children. I will never forget that moment. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, calm and firm, as if she had already placed her trust entirely in Allah. The man with the pistol pointed it directly at my chest. "You know why we're here," he said. "The mosque money, where is it?" I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. The money, $18,000, was locked in a safe in my office. It was collected slowly, painfully, from families who barely had enough to survive winter. That money represented sacrifice, sincerity, and trust in Allah. It doesn't belong to me, I said. My voice was shaking, but my words were clear. That money is an amana. It belongs to Allah. The room went silent. Then the man holding the iron rod laughed. Not a normal laugh, a hollow, cruel sound. You're really willing to die for that money? He said. Think carefully, Imam. In that moment, I knew something terrible. These men were not here just to steal. They were here to erase witnesses. I am not dying for money, I said quietly, but I will not betray an amana. The next moment happened so fast my mind still struggles to replay it clearly. The man with the iron rod stepped forward. I expected the blow to come toward me. Instead, he swung at Aisha. The sound of metal striking her skull was sharp and sickening. She collapsed instantly like her body had been switched off. Blood spread across the floor. Mariam screamed. Ahmed cried out, his breathing breaking into panicked gasps. I dropped to my knees beside Aisha, calling her name, shaking her shoulders. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, then suddenly gone. I checked her pulse. Nothing. I pressed my ear to her chest. Silence. My wife, my companion of 30 years, had stopped breathing. While I tried CPR with shaking hands, the men went into the office. I could hear the safe opening. I could hear them counting the money, congratulating each other, laughing. When they returned, they saw me kneeling in blood, trying to revive my wife. They saw my children frozen with terror, and instead of remorse, their faces showed irritation. You should have cooperated faster, one of them said. I looked up at them with tears running down my face and said, You killed her. The leader tilted his head slightly. Here's the problem, he said. You've seen our faces. Your kids have seen our faces. We can't leave loose ends. My heart stopped. They weren't finished. Get up, the man said. We're going outside. Outside? I whispered. In this storm, we'll freeze. That's the idea, he replied. That was the moment I realized. They were not going to shoot us. They were going to let the cold do the killing. And the worst part? I was about to carry my wife's lifeless body into the storm with my own hands. The real nightmare was only beginning. They forced me to lift her. My hands were trembling as I picked up Aisha's body. She was still warm, still soft, but completely lifeless. Her head fell against my chest as if she were only sleeping. But I knew the truth. I had felt the silence where her heartbeat should have been. I had counted seconds that felt like years, begging Allah for a sign that never came. The door opened, and the storm hit us like a wall. The cold was brutal, immediate, unforgiving. The wind screamed as if the earth itself was angry. Snow slammed into our faces so hard it burned. Within seconds, my beard was frozen, my eyelashes stiff with ice. Ahmed began coughing violently, his chest tightening with every breath. His asthma was getting worse fast. Move! One of the men shouted. I stepped forward into snow that reached my knees, then my thighs. Every step felt like dragging my body through cement. Mariam struggled behind me, carrying Ahmed on her back. He was wheezing loudly now, every breath a fight. His inhaler was still inside the house. We would never reach it again. We walked maybe 200 yards, but it felt endless. The darkness swallowed everything. The house disappeared behind us. The barn vanished into white shadows. There was nothing but wind, snow, and fear. They stopped in an open clearing between the house and the field. This is good, the leader said calmly. Start digging. I stared at him, confused. Digging? He smiled beneath the mask. Your grave. My heart sank into my stomach. They threw a shovel at my feet. The metal hit the frozen ground with a dull thud. I looked down at Aisha, laid her gently in the snow, her face already pale blue. Just hours earlier, she had smiled at me while making tea. Now she lay motionless, her life stolen in seconds. I picked up the shovel. The ground was frozen solid. The first strike barely chipped the surface. Each swing sent shock through my arms and shoulders. My fingers burned, then went numb. My breath came out in short, painful gasps. The wind showed no mercy. I dug. Not to escape, not to fight, but to make space for death. Mariam sat nearby, holding Ahmad tightly. His breathing was terrifying now, high-pitched, shallow, desperate. His lips were turning blue. Every father knows the sound of a child in danger. That sound was tearing me apart. Minutes lost meaning. There was only the shovel, the frozen earth, and the sound of my son struggling to breathe. Finally, the leader looked down into the hole. That's enough. The pit was about 5 feet deep. Get in, he said. I wanted to scream. I wanted to attack them with my bare hands. I wanted to beg until my voice broke completely. Please, I said one last time. My children are innocent. Let them go. Take everything. The man shook his head. Life isn't fair, Imam. You should know that. I helped Mariam down first. Her body was shaking, not just from cold, but from pure terror. Then Ahmad. He could barely stand. I lowered him gently, trying to keep him upright so he could breathe. Baba, he whispered weakly. I can't breathe. I know, my son, I said, choking on my own words. Just hold on. Hold on for what? For freezing? For suffocation? For death? Finally, I climbed down into the hole. I pulled Aisha's body into my arms and sat at the bottom of that grave. Frozen dirt pressed against my legs. Ice walls surrounded us. Above, 3 armed men stood like shadows against the storm. Any last words? One of them asked. I looked up at the sky, barely visible through the swirling snow. Oh Allah, I whispered, you are my only witness. Then the first shovel of snow hit us, then another, and another. The earth began to bury us alive. And in that moment, surrounded by death with no escape and no strength left, I realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. I had reached the end of myself. And only Allah remained. The sound of the shovel did not stop. Snow and frozen dirt kept falling into the grave, hitting our bodies with dull, heavy thuds. Each load pressed us deeper into the earth, stealing warmth, stealing air, stealing hope. I pulled my children closer with one arm and wrapped the other around Aisha's lifeless body, shielding her face from the falling dirt with my coat. The cold was no longer just outside us, it was inside us. My fingers had lost all feeling. My legs felt like stone. My breath came shallow and slow. Ahmad's breathing was the worst sound I have ever heard. It was no longer a wheeze, it was a whisper. Every breath sounded like it might be his last. Baba, he gasped, barely audible. I can't breathe. Mariam was crying silently now, her face pressed against my shoulder. Her tears froze on my shirt the moment they fell. She was trying to be strong, trying not to scream, trying not to make things worse. Above us, the men laughed. They joked as they buried us, speaking about the mosque money, about how no one would ever know what happened to us. One of them said the storm would erase everything, our bodies, our home, our names. In that moment, I felt something heavier than the snow. I felt the weight of complete helplessness. I had preached about patience. I had spoken about trusting Allah in hardship. I had reminded people that trials are tests of faith. But now I was inside the test, and I had nothing left, no strength, no plan, no escape, only fear and a broken heart. Oh Allah, I whispered, my lips barely moving. Where are you? There was no thunder, no sudden light, no voice from the sky, only wind, only cold, only the sound of earth closing over us. The snow reached our chests. The pressure became unbearable. Hundreds of pounds of frozen dirt pressed against us, crushing the air from our lungs. I could barely move my arms now. Every breath burned like fire in my chest. Aisha's body was growing colder by the second. Her skin felt like ice, her lips were pale, her face still. I knew with absolute certainty that she was gone. My son was slipping away, and my daughter was watching it happen. I closed my eyes. I did not ask for wealth. I did not ask for safety. I did not ask for escape. I asked for mercy. O Allah, I prayed silently. If this is the end, then take us with Iman. Do not let my children die afraid. And then, something changed. It was not a sound from outside. It was not a voice spoken aloud. It was something deeper. A certainty placed directly into my heart. Do not surrender. Life is in my hands. Speak. I opened my eyes. The grave was nearly closed now. Only a narrow opening above us remained. Snow fell directly onto my face. I could barely breathe. Speak? Speak what? To whom? My wife was dead. My son was dying. The earth was closing. And yet, the certainty remained. I remembered the Quranic truth I had taught so many times, but had never needed like this before. It is Allah who gives life and causes death. Not doctors, not weapons, Not storms, not graves, only Allah. My body was shaking violently now, not just from cold, but from the realization that this moment would define everything. I leaned my face close to Aisha's ear, even though I knew she could not hear me. My voice was barely a breath. "Oh Allah," I whispered, "you created her. You took her soul. And if you will it, you can return it." The snow was at our shoulders now. Seconds remained, and with the last strength left in my lungs, I spoke the words that rose from the deepest place of belief I had ever known. "By your command, O Allah, let there be life." The grave went silent, and then something impossible began to happen. For a moment, nothing happened. The grave remained dark. The snow kept falling. The pressure of the earth did not ease. I thought, perhaps this was it. Perhaps my words were only the sound of a dying man clinging to hope. Ahmad's breathing was almost gone now. Each breath was shallow, weak, barely present. Miriam's body had gone still against mine. Fear had drained her of tears. And then, I felt it, not imagination, not desperation. A movement. Aisha's chest rose. At first I thought my mind was breaking under the weight of grief. But then it happened again. A deep, sudden breath, violent, full, real. Her body jerked as air rushed into lungs that had been silent. "Aisha," I whispered, my voice cracking. Her fingers tightened around my arm. Her eyes opened. I froze. The woman whose pulse I had checked, the woman whose breath I had felt stop, the woman whose body had grown cold in my arms. She was breathing. She turned her face toward me, confusion and life returning together. Her voice came out weak but clear. "Abdullah, where are we?" I could not answer. My mouth opened, but no words came. My heart was pounding so violently I thought it might burst. Above us, the shoveling stopped. I heard one of the men shout, his voice sharp with panic. "Did you hear that?" Aisha shifted, pushing snow and dirt off her shoulders. The weight around us loosened slightly as she moved. Her eyes focused quickly, not the eyes of a dying woman, but the eyes of someone fully awake. Then she turned to Ahmad. Our son was barely conscious. His lips were blue. His breathing was a faint, broken sound. Aisha placed both hands on his chest. "Breathe, my son," she said firmly. "By the permission of Allah, breathe." And I watched. I watched color return to his face. I watched his chest rise and fall more deeply. I watched the wheeze disappear from his breathing. No inhaler, no medicine, no explanation. Just breath. Miriam gasped. "Mama?" Aisha looked at her, then at me. There was no fear on her face, only clarity. "We need to get out," she said calmly. At that moment, something else happened. Warmth. Not body heat, not movement. Warmth surrounded us, filling the grave like invisible fire. My numb fingers began to tingle. My chest felt lighter. The crushing cold that had been killing us seconds earlier began to retreat. Above us, panic broke loose. "What is this?" one of the men shouted. "She was dead!" another screamed. A shovel slipped from someone's hands and clattered into the snow. Aisha stood up. I don't know how there was space. I don't know how the grave felt suddenly deeper. She looked up toward the opening above us. Snow swirled around her face, but she did not flinch. "You thought you could end what Allah protects?" she called out. Her voice was strong, stronger than I had ever heard it. "You thought the grave could hold us." One of the men raised his weapon, his hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. "Stay back!" he yelled. Aisha did not move. "Kill me again if you wish," she said calmly. "You already tried." Fear overtook them completely. They stepped back. Then they ran. Not walking, not retreating. Running into the storm, dropping their weapons, leaving the money behind, fleeing as if death itself were chasing them. I pulled my children close. We climbed, scraping hands, frozen boots, shaking bodies, out of the grave. We stood there in the storm, alive, breathing. Warm. I looked at my wife, the woman I had buried, the woman Allah had returned to life. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered only one sentence. Allah is greater than death. And the grave behind us stood empty. For a few seconds, none of us moved. The storm still raged around us, wind screaming across the open land, snow blinding and relentless. The grave behind us stood half filled, silent evidence of what was meant to be our end. Our breath rose in thick clouds, but unlike moments before, our bodies no longer shook uncontrollably from cold. We were alive. I held Ahmad tightly, pressing my face against his head, feeling his steady breathing. No wheezing, no panic, just warm breath against my cheek. Mariam stood beside her mother, gripping her arm as if afraid she might disappear again. Aisha touched the wound on her temple. Blood had dried along her hairline, but she stood firm, balanced, alert. Any doctor would have said she should not even be conscious, yet there she was, calm and present. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice hoarse. "We need help." The house was still more than 200 yards away, barely visible through the snow. The road lay farther beyond, buried somewhere beneath the white chaos. Phone lines were down. Vehicles were useless. And those men, terrified but dangerous, were somewhere in the darkness. Aisha looked toward where the road should have been. "We walk," she said simply. Mariam's eyes widened. "In this storm?" "We walked out of a grave," Aisha replied. "Allah did not save us to leave us here." So we walked. Each step was a struggle. Snow reached our chests in places. The wind pushed against us, trying to throw us off balance. But something was different now. The storm felt loud, violent, but not confusing. We did not wander. We did not circle back. Somehow we always knew which direction to go. I cannot explain that part logically. It felt as if the path was already prepared. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My legs burned. My lungs ached. But Ahmad kept moving, held between me and his mother. Mariam did not stumble once. And then, lights. Two headlights cut through the white darkness. A pickup truck slowed, then stopped abruptly. A man stepped out, bundled in heavy gear. He stared at us as if seeing ghosts. "Is that Abdullah?" he called out. It was Sheriff Daniel Harper, the county sheriff. His face was pale beneath his cap, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What in God's name?" he whispered as he came closer. "We got a report of armed men heading toward your property. We tried to reach you, but the storm—" His words faded as he looked at Aisha, her blood-stained face, her calm expression, her steady breathing. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "are you injured?" "I was killed," Aisha replied simply. "Allah returned my life." The sheriff froze. I placed my hand on his arm. "Check her pulse, check her pupils, look at the wound." He did. His expression changed from confusion to shock. This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "No," I said quietly, it doesn't, because what happened tonight was not in human hands." He drove us back toward the house. The damage spoke louder than any words. The broken door, the blood on the floor, the open safe, the scattered furniture, and then the grave. The sheriff stood at its edge for a long time, staring down into the frozen pit. "I've been doing this job for 23 years, he said finally. "I've seen accidents, murders, disasters, but this—" He looked back at Aisha. "This is something else." The men were caught 2 days later. Their truck had slid into a ditch miles away. They were found half-frozen, delirious, speaking in panic about a woman who came back from death and a grave that would not hold its victims. They confessed to everything. As they were taken away, I felt no hatred. Only one truth echoed in my heart. When Allah decides that life will continue, no storm, no weapon, and no grave can stop it. And our story was far from over. The days that followed felt unreal, as if we were moving through someone else's life. Doctors examined Aisha for hours. They ran scans, tests, and repeated the same questions again and again. The fracture on her skull was clearly visible. Any physician could see it. One doctor shook his head slowly as he studied the images. "This injury," he said carefully, "should have caused massive brain trauma. She should not have survived. Even if she had survived, she should not be standing, speaking, or fully aware." But she was. Her pulse was strong, her memory was clear, her balance was steady. There was no confusion, no loss of speech, no neurological damage. The doctor finally leaned back in his chair and said something that stayed with me forever. "There is no medical explanation for this." Ahmad was examined next. For years, his asthma had been severe. Winter was always dangerous for him. Doctors knew his case well. He had records, medications, emergency visits. That night alone should have killed him. Cold air, stress, lack of treatment. But his lungs were clear. Perfectly clear. The specialist reviewed his files twice, then called another doctor into the room. They listened to Ahmad breathe. They ran tests. They looked at each other in disbelief. "This isn't improvement," one of them said quietly. "This is absence. It's as if the condition never existed." I simply nodded. I had already seen the answer inside a grave. News traveled fast in a small rural community. At first, people whispered. Then they asked questions. Then they came to our house, not out of curiosity, but confusion. Farmers, factory workers, neighbors who had known us for years stood in silence as they listened. We did not exaggerate. We did not decorate the story. We told it exactly as it happened. Some people cried. Some people stood quietly, unable to speak. Some simply said, "Allah is powerful." The mosque donations were returned to the community untouched. Not a single dollar was missing. When people saw the money returned, still counted and intact, something shifted in them. They did not see a story. They saw integrity. They saw Amana protected even when life was threatened. Within weeks, support came from places we never expected. People who had never donated before came forward. Not because they were inspired by a miracle, but because they had witnessed sincerity. The mosque was built the following year. It was named Resurrection Masjid, not as a symbol of pride, but as a reminder. A reminder that Allah gives life where none seems possible. The men who attacked us were sentenced. They spoke little during the trial. One of them avoided looking at Aisha entirely. Another broke down when describing the grave. "She was dead," he kept repeating. "She was dead." But fear does not erase accountability. Justice was served. And yet, despite everything, something surprising happened inside me. I did not feel anger. I felt responsibility. Allah had not returned my wife to life so that we could live quietly and forget. He had not healed my son so that we could move on as if nothing happened. We were witnesses now, not witnesses of violence, but witnesses of mercy. Not witnesses of criminals, but witnesses of divine authority. Life slowly returned to routine. Seasons changed, snow melted, fields turned green. But we were no longer the same family that had entered that winter. Miriam became fearless in a way only someone who has faced death can be. She stopped worrying about people's opinions. She focused on purpose. Ahmad never asked for his inhaler again. And Aisha, she carried the scar on her head with dignity. She did not hide it. When people asked, she did not dramatize the story. She simply said, "Allah decided my time was not finished." As for me, I learned something I could never have learned from a book. Faith is not proven in comfort. Faith is proven when the grave closes, and what came next would show just how far that lesson would reach. 10 years have passed since that night. 10 winters have come and gone, each one reminding us of the storm that should have ended our lives. Time has softened some memories, but it has not erased the truth of what happened. If anything, it has made it clearer. Some miracles fade in memory. This one did not. Aisha still carries the scar on her temple. It is thin now, pale against her skin, but it never disappeared. Doctors once offered cosmetic surgery to reduce it. She refused. "This scar is not damage," she said. "It is evidence." She returned to normal life slowly. There were no dramatic changes, no claims of visions or special status. She cooked, cleaned, prayed, and lived as she always had, except with a deeper stillness, a quiet certainty, the kind that does not need to argue or explain itself. People often expected her to speak loudly about what happened. She did not. When asked how she survived, she would simply say, "Allah gives life and takes it back. That night he gave it back." Ahmad grew strong. Not gradually, completely. Winter no longer frightened him. Cold air no longer stole his breath. He ran, played, and laughed like a child who had never known sickness. Follow-up medical tests continued for years. Every result said the same thing. His lungs were healthy. At 16, he ran his first long-distance race. I watched him cross the finish line, breathing freely, smiling. My hands shook as I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Miriam changed in ways harder to measure. She became deeply serious about purpose. Fear disappeared from her language. She stopped asking, "What if?" and started asking, "Why not?" When people asked what gave her such strength, she answered honestly, "I watched my mother return from death. What else should I fear?" She later chose to work in humanitarian relief, helping families displaced by violence and disaster. She told me once, when you've sat in a grave and walked out, darkness loses its authority. As for me, I continued to lead prayers and teach, but not the same way. Before, I spoke about patience as a concept. Now, I spoke about it as a memory. Before, I taught tawakkul as trust. Now, I taught it as survival. People listened differently, not because of my words, but because of what Allah had allowed us to live through. The mosque continued to grow. New families came. Old ones stayed. No banners advertised miracles. No signs told our story. Yet people felt something when they entered that place, a calm, a humility, a reminder that this life is fragile and sacred. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think about that grave, about how close death was, about how final it felt, about how helpless I truly was. And I realized something important. The miracle was not only that Aisha lived. The miracle was not only that Ahmad was healed. The miracle was that Allah taught us that no situation is beyond His command. Not fear, not violence, not cold, not death itself. Many people ask me what I felt when my wife came back to life. I tell them the truth. I did not feel excitement. I did not feel celebration. I felt submission. Because when you witness that kind of power, pride disappears. Arrogance dissolves. All that remains is awareness that you are standing in front of a reality far greater than yourself. We walked out of a grave that night, but the lesson of that grave never left us. And what remains to be said, the reason I still tell this story, comes next. Because the grave was never the end of the message. It was the beginning. There is something I have learned over the years since that night, something that only becomes clear with time. Not every grave is made of earth. Some graves are built slowly, with fear, with loss, with disappointment, with unanswered prayers. Many people who heard our story came to me later, not asking about the miracle itself, but about their own lives. They would sit quietly and say, "I am not buried in snow, but I feel buried." And I understood exactly what they meant. One man was buried under debt, another under grief after losing a child, a woman under a marriage that had died long before the people in it had, a young man under addiction, an old man under regret. Different graves, same darkness. That night taught me something that changed the way I see suffering. When we were in that pit, there was no dignity left, no strength, no reputation. I was not an imam. I was not a leader. I was not a man with answers. I was only a servant begging his lords. And that is where truth begins. Many people think faith is strongest when life is stable. It is not. Faith is exposed when stability is removed, when plans fail, when strength disappears, when control is taken away. In the grave, I had no power. And that is why the moment Allah acted was so clear. Because no one could say it was human effort. No one could claim intelligence or courage or preparation. It was Allah alone. That is why I tell people this. If you feel buried right now, it does not mean Allah has abandoned you. It may mean He has brought you to the place where only He can act. We are taught to fear hardship, but hardship is often the door to certainty. Ease can make us forget. Difficulty strips us bare. In the grave, there was no future to plan for, no reputation to protect, no pride to defend, only surrender. And surrender is not weakness, it is clarity. I often think of the Quranic truth that says Allah gives life to the dead earth after its death. We see it every year, dry land, cracked soil, no sign of life. Then rain comes, and suddenly, green breaks through the ground. That earth was not destroyed, it was waiting. Human hearts are no different. Some of you reading this may feel like your life has ended in some way. A door closed, a dream died, a relationship shattered. You are breathing, but inside something has been buried. I want you to understand this clearly. Being buried does not mean being finished. The grave is not a declaration. It is a condition. And conditions change by the will of Allah. But there is something else I must say, something that is not always easy to hear. Resurrection comes after death. You cannot be restored until something is surrendered. You cannot be raised until something is laid down. That night, I did not negotiate with Allah. I did not offer promises. I did not ask for comfort. I accepted that I was powerless, and that acceptance was the beginning of everything. Many people want Allah's help while still holding control. They want rescue without surrender, relief without humility, solutions without submission. The grave does not allow that. The grave removes illusion. And that is why Allah's help often comes there. If you are reading this and feel that you are at the end, know this: endings in human terms are often beginnings in divine terms. The night we were buried, death seemed victorious. But death does not decide outcomes. Allah does. And the final message of our story, the reason it continues to be told, lies in what that realization demands from all of us. That is what comes next. There is one final truth that night in the grave taught me, a truth I carry with me every day. Allah does not rescue people because they are strong. He rescues them because He is. When we were buried under snow and earth, nothing remained of who I thought I was. Titles meant nothing. Knowledge meant nothing. Experience meant nothing. I was not an imam. I was not a husband who could protect his wife. I was not a father who could save his child. I was only a servant who had reached the end of himself. And that was enough. Many people believe that being chosen by Allah means a life protected from hardship. I have learned the opposite. Being chosen often means being taken through hardships so deep that only Allah can bring you out of it. That night, Allah did not ask me how long I had served Him. He did not ask how much knowledge I had. He did not ask how many people I had guided. He only showed me who truly controls life and death. After everything that happened, people often ask me the same question. Why you? Why your family? Why this miracle? I do not know, and I am comfortable with that. Faith is not about understanding every reason. It is about recognizing authority, and authority belongs only to Allah. What I do know is this: Allah was not finished with us. He was not finished with Aisha. He was not finished with Ahmad. He was not finished with Maryam. And He was not finished with me. And if you are reading this, feeling trapped in something you cannot escape, maybe He is not finished with you either. People often look at graves as endings, but in our story, the grave was a meeting point, a place where human effort ended and divine will began. That is why I no longer fear losing control. Control is an illusion. We plan, we calculate, we prepare. But when Allah decides to act, all that remains is His command, be. And it is. If you are in pain right now, I will not insult you by saying it is easy. If you are struggling, I will not pretend that faith removes the weight. If you are afraid, I will not tell you fear is weakness. Even prophets feared. Even the righteous cried out in darkness. What matters is not the fear, but who you turn to inside it. When the grave closed over us, I did not see light. I did not hear angels. I did not feel comfort. I felt surrender. And surrender was enough to open a door that force never could. So I leave you with this message, not as a speaker, not as a storyteller, but as a man who sat in a grave and walked out. Whatever has buried you does not own you. Whatever has frightened you does not control you. Whatever has convinced you that it is over is not the final authority. Allah is. If He decides to give life, no grave can stop it. If He decides to heal, no disease can resist it. If He decides to open a way, no storm can block it. You may be in the darkest chapter of your life right now, but darkness is not proof of absence. It is often proof that a test is unfolding. The night we were buried, it felt like the end. It was not. It was the moment Allah showed us that nothing, absolutely nothing, has the final word except Him. And if Allah has not finished with you yet, then your story is still being written, even if it begins in a grave.